Ah, you're one of those little people.
Yes.
Operator.
Operator, I need an ambulance right away.
I just spotted two of the little people.
Two of them? Are you sure of that?
Yes, sir.
Imagine being chased by a spider the size of a Volkswagen. Your heart's pounding as you dash across what used to be an ordinary kitchen floor. Now a vast concrete-like expanse where a single crumb looks like a boulder. That's not a nightmare. It's just another Tuesday for the survivors of the Spindrift and Land of the Giants, the show that turned everyday objects into menacing monsters and ordinary backyards into alien landscapes. The late 60s were a wild time for sci-fi TV. While Star Trek was exploring the final frontier and Lost in Space was, well, getting lost in space, producer Irwin Allen had an even crazier idea. What if we took regular folks and shrunk them down in a world where everything else was gigantic? And when I say regular folks, I mean the passengers and crew of Spindrift, a suborbital spacecraft that crash-landed on a mysterious planet where everything and everyone was 12 times larger than normal. Here's the thing that blows my mind. ABC threw an absolutely insane amount of money at this show. We're talking $250,000 per episode, and in $1968. To put that in perspective, that was more than what most feature films were spending on their weekly production budgets. It was literally the most expensive TV show of its time, and you could see every penny of that budget on screen. But what really made Land of the Giants special wasn't just its massive budget or even its clever premise. It was how the show tapped into something deeply human, that universal feeling of being overwhelmed by a world that sometimes seems too big to handle. Think about it. Haven't we all felt tiny and vulnerable at some point? This show took that feeling and turned it into a thrilling adventure that mixed wonder with terror, hope with helplessness. The real genius was how it made the mundane terrifying. A simple house cat became a monstrous threat. A garden hose transformed into a python-sized danger. Even something as simple as crossing a room became an epic journey when you're only 6 inches tall. It played with scale in a way that made viewers see their everyday world differently, and maybe jump a little the next time they saw a spider in their bathroom. And all of this was happening at a time when the world itself felt like it was getting bigger and scarier. The space race was in full swing, the Cold War was raging, and social changes were sweeping across America. In a way, Land of the Giants captured that feeling of being small in a rapidly changing world, giving viewers a way to process those anxieties through adventure and excitement rather than fear. Remember that scene where Steve and Dan used a broken light bulb as a boat, rowing through a puddle that looked like an ocean? Or when Betty and Valerie had to escape from a drawer using a ruler as a bridge, while a giant cat batted at them? These weren't just cool scenes. They were revolutionary pieces of television magic that had never been attempted on a weekly basis before. The show pulled off these illusions using a combination of oversized sets, split-screen shots, and some seriously clever camera work. For the iconic light bulb scene in The Crash, they actually built a 12-foot light bulb and filled a soundstage with enough water to make it float. The actors, Gary Conway and Don Marshall, were really rowing inside it while massive wave machines created a stormy puddle around them. Let me paint you a picture of what it took to make a single scene. For the episode The Underground, where our heroes navigate through a giant's desk drawer, the props department built 2 complete sets. The giant version had drawers the size of rooms, with pencils as thick as telephone poles and paper clips you could use as monkey bars. Then they had a normal-sized desk for the shots of the giants. Each prop had to be perfectly matched in both scales, right down to the wood grain and wear marks. The real technical breakthrough came with their blue screen work. Unlike previous shows that kept their miniature effects minimal, Land of the Giants would regularly composite 12 to 15 shots in a single scene. The episode Ghost Town pushed this to the limit with 22 separate elements in one sequence. a record for television at the time. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. The blue screen technology they used was pretty primitive, and sometimes you can spot the edges around the characters that give away the effect. During filming of The Golden Cage, where the team had to escape from a bird cage, the blue screen work was so complex that they spent 3 days shooting what ended up being just 4 minutes of screen time. The most impressive part wasn't even the big action scenes. It was the quiet moments, like in Terror Go Round, where they turned a music box into an entire set, complete with working gears that the characters had to dodge, or in Brainwash, where they built a giant typewriter with keys that actually moved, creating one of the most elaborate sets of the series. And here's a fun fact that really puts things in perspective. The show employed over 40 special effects artists full-time, more than any other TV show of its era. Each episode used an average of 50 oversized props, all of which had to be custom built since you couldn't exactly shop for a 12-foot pencil at the local store. The people who made us believe. You can have all the giant props in the world, but they don't mean anything without actors who can make you believe they're actually 6 inches tall. And that's where Land of the Giants really struck gold. Let me tell you about the brave crew and passengers of Spindrift who sold us on this wild adventure. Gary Conway played Captain Steve Burton, and he had probably the toughest job of all. Try looking terrified of a normal-sized house cat while staring at a piece of tape on a blue screen. But Conway brought this mix of determination and vulnerability to the role that made you believe he could actually lead a group of survivors in this insane situation. There's this great episode called The Trap, where he has to climb up a telephone cord while being hunted by a giant. And you can see the actual strain on his face as he's doing his own stunts on that oversized prop. Then there's Kurt Kasner as Alexander Fitzhugh, the show's secret weapon. Fitzhugh was this wonderfully complex character, a cowardly con man who'd occasionally show flashes of real bravery. Kasner brought this perfect mix of comedy and pathos to the role. Watch The Golden Cage, where he has to choose between saving himself or helping his friends. His facial expressions tell an entire story without a word. But here's something that was pretty revolutionary for 1968. Don Marshall played Dan Erickson, making him one of the few black actors in a leading role on network television at the time. And this wasn't just token casting. Dan was smart, capable, and essential to the team's survival. Marshall brought such dignity and strength to the role, especially in episodes like Giants and All That Jazz, where he takes center stage. The real unsung heroes were the stunt team. These folks were doing absolutely insane things, hanging from giant props 30 feet in the air, falling onto massive foam rubber tables that looked like normal furniture on camera, all while making it look like they were actually tiny people. During the filming of Ghost Town, one stuntman had to time his jump perfectly to make it look like he was being flicked by a giant finger. Talk about trust in your safety equipment. And here's something most people don't know. The cast actually went through a sort of mini boot camp before filming started. They had to learn how to move and react in a way that would make the scale differences believable. They practiced with oversized props, learned how to time their movements with blue screen effects, and even studied footage of small animals to see how they moved in large spaces. It paid off. Watch any episode, and you'll notice how the actors always seem aware of their size, whether they're crossing what's supposed to be a massive desktop or hiding behind a giant coffee cup. The chemistry between the cast made even the most outlandish situations feel real. When they're huddled together in a giant matchbox, planning their next move, you don't see actors on a set. You see survivors trying to make it in a world that wasn't built for them. And maybe that's why the show still connects with people today. Because sometimes we all feel like we're trying to survive in a world that's just too big to handle. From mixed reviews to cult classic. You know how some shows are just ahead of their time? When Land of the Giants first hit TV screens in 1968, critics didn't quite know what to make of it. The Hollywood Reporter called it expensive hokum, while Variety praised its effects, but questioned if the concept could sustain a series. But here's the funny thing. While critics were scratching their heads, kids and families were glued to their TV sets every Sunday night. The show pulled in solid ratings, especially in its first season. People couldn't get enough of those incredible special effects, even if they sometimes spotted the wires holding up the props or caught glimpses of the blue screen edges. But what's really interesting is how the show found its real audience years later in syndication. That's when something fascinating happened. People started appreciating it on a whole different level. Let me share some behind-the-scenes drama that most folks don't know about. ABC was constantly battling with producer Irwin Allen over the budget. By episode 12 of the first season, they'd already blown through their effects budget for the entire year. But Allen wouldn't compromise. He kept pushing for bigger and better effects. During the filming of The Mechanical Man, they literally had to build a giant robot that could interact with both the regular-sized actors and the giant performers. The network executives nearly had a heart attack when they saw the bill. Here's a cool detail that even die-hard fans might not know. The show actually had different versions made for different countries. In some European markets, they added extra scenes, and sometimes even changed entire plot points. There's a German version of Ghost Town that has a completely different ending. The show also stirred up some controversy with its portrayal of the Giants. Some viewers thought they were too one-dimensional, always the bad guys, but if you watch carefully, there are episodes like Every Dog Needs a Boy, where we see a more nuanced take. The Giants aren't just monsters, they're people living their lives, occasionally showing kindness to our tiny heroes. And get this, some of the original props still exist. That massive phone from the pilot episode, it's sitting in a private collection in California. The giant pencil from the flight plan, it showed up at an auction in 2019 and sold for more than anybody expected. These aren't just props anymore. They're pieces of television history. What's really wild is how the show's reputation has evolved over time. Today, special effects artists study those old episodes to learn about practical effects and forced perspective. Modern shows like The Mandalorian still use some of the same principles that Land of the Giants pioneered, just with updated technology. And in an age where CGI dominates, there's something really special about seeing these handcrafted effects that required such incredible creativity and craftsmanship. You know what's wild? A show about tiny people in a giant world from the 60s still has something to say to us today. In fact, Land of the Giants might be more relevant now than ever, just not in the ways you might expect. Look at modern movies like Ant-Man, that scene where he falls onto a giant vinyl record, pure Land of the Giants energy. The show basically wrote the playbook for tiny world storytelling, influencing everything from Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, to Studio Ghibli's Arrietty. But it's not just about the visuals. In today's world of unlimited CGI, there's something special about watching artists solve problems with practical effects. Modern shows like The Mandalorian are actually returning to these techniques, using a high-tech version of what Land of the Giants pioneered. Those giant props and forced perspective shots from 1968 still look convincing today, sometimes more so than early CGI from the 90s. But the show's real legacy is how it speaks to our modern experience. Think about it. We're all trying to navigate systems and institutions that feel impossibly large. Social media makes us feel simultaneously connected and tiny. The show's core message about regular people dealing with forces bigger than themselves hits differently now. It's not just about surviving in a big world. It's about finding ways to thrive in it. The series tackled surprisingly modern themes too. That episode about pollution? Now it reads like a metaphor for the climate crisis. Stories about cooperation and community in the face of overwhelming odds? That's basically a playbook for modern life. What's really fascinating is how the practical effects have aged better than you'd expect. Watch an episode from 1968, and there's something about those physical, practical effects that our brains just accept as real, even if we can see the seams sometimes. In the end, Land of the Giants wasn't just a show about little people in a big world. It was about human ingenuity, resilience, and hope, themes that never go out of style. In today's world, where we're all trying to navigate spaces and systems that sometimes feel impossibly large, maybe that's exactly the kind of story we need to remember. Hey, if you've enjoyed diving into this fascinating piece of TV history with me, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. We've got plenty more stories about groundbreaking shows that shape the way we tell stories today. Drop a comment below and let me know what classic sci-fi series you'd like me to cover next. Until then, keep looking up. You never know when you might spot a giant.